It was a cold Tuesday evening when the police van rolled into the downtown station. Inside sat 7 people who'd been picked up during a sweep of the city's central district. Most of them were loud, complaining about their rights, making phone calls in their heads to lawyers they didn't have. But one man sat perfectly still in the corner. He looked like he'd been living rough for months. His clothes were stained and torn in places. His hair hung long and tangled around his face. A thick beard covered most of his features. His hands were dirty, fingernails rimmed with grime. To anyone glancing at him, he was just another person who'd fallen through the cracks of society. Officer Williams opened the back of the van and started calling names. One by one, people shuffled out onto the concrete. When they got to the quiet man in the corner, Williams looked at his clipboard and frowned. "You. Come on out." The man stood slowly and stepped down from the van. He moved with a strange kind of grace that didn't quite match his appearance. "Name?" Williams asked, pen ready. The man looked at him but said nothing. "I need your name, sir." Still nothing, not even a flicker of response. Williams sighed heavily. It was going to be one of those nights. "Do you have any identification on you?" The man reached into his pocket and pulled it inside out. Empty. He did the same with his other pockets. Nothing. No wallet, no cards, no phone, no papers. Nothing that would tell them who he was. "Can you speak?" Williams asked, louder this time, as if volume might help. The man nodded once. "Then why won't you tell me your name?" The man simply looked at him with calm, steady eyes. The kind of eyes that seemed to look right through you. Williams felt a flash of irritation. "Listen, buddy, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We can't process you without a name." Another officer walked over. "What's the problem?" "This one won't talk. Won't give us a name. Says he can speak but just won't do it." The second officer looked the man up and down. "Another one playing games. Just book him as John Doe. We'll figure it out later." They led him inside to the processing area. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh white glow. They took his fingerprints, rolling each finger carefully across the ink pad and then onto the card. The man cooperated with everything, following every instruction but without saying a single word. "Prints are running through the system," a clerk called out from behind a computer. "Should know in a few minutes if he's in there." While they waited, they put him in a holding cell with 3 other men. The cell was small, with concrete walls painted an ugly shade of green that had probably been white decades ago. A metal bench ran along one wall. The silent man sat down at the far end, folded his hands in his lap and closed his eyes. "Hey, look at this guy," one of the other prisoners said, a young man with tattoos crawling up his neck. "Think you're too good to talk to us?" The silent man didn't react. "My friend's talking to you," another one said, this one older with a rough voice that came from years of cigarettes. "It's rude not to answer." Still nothing. The tattooed man laughed. "Maybe he's crazy. Maybe they should have taken him to the psych ward instead. Or maybe he's just stupid," the third one added. "Can't talk because he don't know how." They kept at it for a while, making jokes, trying to get a reaction. The silent man sat there like a statue. After about 20 minutes, they got bored and started talking among themselves instead. Back at the processing desk, the computer beeped. The clerk leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Nothing. No matches in the system. This guy's a ghost." Williams walked back to the holding cell. "All right, John Doe, we've got nothing on you. No record, no warrants, no identification. You want to make this easy and just tell us who you are?" The man opened his eyes and looked at Williams. Then he shook his head slowly. "Fine, have it your way. You'll see the judge in the morning." As Williams walked away, he muttered to his partner, "I don't get people sometimes. Why make things complicated? Just give us a name and we can all go home." The night dragged on slowly in the holding cell. The other prisoners eventually fell asleep, sprawled across the bench or leaning against the wall. The silent man stayed in his corner, sitting upright with perfect posture, eyes open now, watching the hallway outside. A young officer on night duty walked past around 3 in the morning. He stopped when he saw the man still awake. "Can't sleep?" The man looked at him but didn't respond. "Look, I don't know what your deal is, but tomorrow's not going to go well if you keep up this silent act. The judge doesn't like games." Just some friendly advice. There was something in the man's eyes right then. Not defiance, not anger, not fear. Just a deep, patient calm. Like someone waiting for a bus they knew would eventually come. The officer shrugged and kept walking. Morning came with a clatter of keys and shouted instructions. Breakfast was pushed through a slot in the cell door, plastic trays with something that might have been eggs and toast. The other prisoners grabbed theirs and ate hungrily. The silent man took his tray, examined it for a moment, then ate slowly and methodically. "We're going to court soon," the tattooed man said to the others. "Public defender's probably going to get me out."
"What about you guys?"
They all shared their stories, their charges, their plans. The silent man listened but didn't join in. "What about you, Silent Bob?" the tattooed man said. "Oh wait, you don't talk. Guess we'll never know your story." An hour later, officers came to take them to the courthouse. They were handcuffed and led through a series of hallways and doors, then loaded into another van. The silent man sat in his same spot in the corner, looking out the small window at the city passing by. People on the streets went about their morning routines. They rushed to work, sipped coffee, checked their phones. None of them knew that in this van, someone was conducting an experiment that would eventually make them question everything they believed about dignity, identity, and how we treat people we think don't matter. The van pulled up to the courthouse. The doors opened. The silent man stepped out into the morning light, still saying nothing, still keeping his secret locked away. Whatever was coming next, he was ready for it. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale air. It was one of those places that had seen thousands of cases, where the walls could probably tell stories that would make you lose faith in humanity or restore it, depending on the day. The silent man sat in the defendant's area, still handcuffed, still quiet. A public defender had been assigned to him that morning, a tired-looking woman in her 40s named Ms. Chen, who'd been doing this job for 15 years. She'd tried talking to him in the holding room before court. "Listen, I can't help you if you won't tell me anything," she'd said, frustration creeping into her voice. "At minimum, I need to know your name. Do you understand that?" He'd nodded. "So you understand, but you won't tell me." Another nod. She'd rubbed her temples. This is going to be a disaster. Now they sat waiting for the judge. The courtroom was filling up with other cases, other defendants, other lawyers shuffling papers and whispering strategies. A few people in the gallery were there for their own cases, but others were just curious onlookers. Word had spread about the man who wouldn't speak. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Everyone stood as Judge Harrison entered. He was in his 60s, gray-haired, with reading glasses that he wore on a chain around his neck. He'd presided over this courtroom for 20 years and thought he'd seen everything. He was about to discover he was wrong. The judge settled into his seat and looked at the docket. Next case, the State versus John Doe. Charges of vagrancy and failure to provide identification. Ms. Chen stood up. "Your Honor, I'm representing the defendant. Has your client decided to identify himself yet?" "No, Your Honor. He remains unwilling to speak." Judge Harrison looked over his glasses at the silent man. "Stand up, please." The man stood, his posture straight despite the shabby clothes. "Sir, this is a court of law. You're required to identify yourself. Do you understand?" The man nodded. "But you refuse to give us your name?" Another nod. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Harrison frowned. "This is highly irregular. Are you unable to speak or unwilling?" Ms. Chen spoke up. "Your Honor, according to the police report, he indicated that he can speak but chooses not to." "I see." The judge leaned back in his chair. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Will you tell this court your name?" The silent man reached for the notepad that Ms. Chen had placed in front of him. He wrote 2 words in clear, surprisingly elegant handwriting. "Not guilty." He held it up for the judge to see. "That's not what I asked you," Judge Harrison said, his voice rising slightly. "I asked for your name." The man set down the notepad and stood quietly, his hands at his sides. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Someone in the back laughed. "This is crazy," a voice said. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Order. I'll have order in this courtroom." He looked at Ms. Chen. "Counselor, I'm going to need a psychiatric evaluation on your client. We need to determine if he's competent to stand trial." "Your Honor, with respect, the initial police assessment suggests he's perfectly lucid. He follows instructions, he responds to questions with gestures, he just won't speak. Nevertheless, we can't proceed without knowing who we're prosecuting. This man could be anyone. He could be wanted for serious crimes in another jurisdiction. Until we know his identity, this case is at a standstill." The judge made a note. "Evaluation to be completed within 2 weeks. Defendant to remain in custody." Next case. The bailiff led the silent man out of the courtroom. Behind him, the whispers grew louder. Someone was already pulling out their phone, typing furiously. By that afternoon, the story had hit local news. "Mysterious man refuses to speak in court," read one headline. A local TV station sent a reporter to the courthouse to get footage and interviews. "It's the strangest case I've seen in years," one lawyer told the camera. "He's clearly not mentally impaired, so what's his game? Why won't he just tell us who he is?" The story spread like wildfire on social media. Someone created a thread trying to guess his identity. "Maybe he's running from something," one comment suggested. "Or maybe he's just trying to get attention," said another. Memes started appearing. Pictures of the man's mugshot with captions like, "When you forgot your own name," and "Me trying to avoid responsibility." The silent man became an internet sensation overnight, but not in the way anyone would want. He was a joke, a curiosity, something to laugh about during lunch breaks and coffee runs. Back in the county jail, he was placed in a single cell this time. The psychiatrist would be coming to evaluate him in a few days. In the meantime, guards and other inmates alike treated him like either a lunatic or a fraud. "Hey, silent man," one guard said during his rounds. "You're famous now. Saw you on the news. My wife thinks you're crazy. I think you're just playing games." The man sat on his bunk reading a book from the prison library. He'd selected it carefully, a thick volume on philosophy. He read slowly, taking in each page with focused attention. A week passed. The psychiatrist arrived, a Dr. Patel who'd evaluated hundreds of defendants over his career. He sat across from the silent man in a small interview room, recording device on the table between them. "I'm going to ask you a series of questions," Dr. Patel began. "You can respond however you like. Writing, gestures, or if you choose, speaking." For 2 hours, Dr. Patel conducted his evaluation. He asked about the man's past, his family, his reasons for silence.
He gave him cognitive tests, showed him pictures, asked him to solve puzzles.
The man cooperated with everything, using the notepad to answer when necessary but never speaking aloud. At the end, Dr. Patel sat back, genuinely puzzled. "I've got to be honest with you," he said. "I can't find anything wrong with you. Your cognitive function is actually above average. You show no signs of psychosis, delusion, or any mental illness I can identify. So why are you doing this?" The man wrote on the notepad, "Personal reasons." "That's not good enough for the court." The man wrote again, "It will have to be." Dr. Patel packed up his materials. "You're making this much harder on yourself than it needs to be. Whatever point you're trying to make, is it worth sitting in jail?" The man met his eyes and nodded once firmly. The psychiatrist left, shaking his head. His report to the judge would be clear. The defendant was completely competent to stand trial, which meant the mystery would continue and the silent man would remain locked up, his identity still unknown, his purpose still hidden. Meanwhile, outside those walls, the story kept growing. A true crime podcast picked it up. YouTube channels made videos analyzing his behavior. Conspiracy theories started floating around. Some people thought he was a spy. Others thought he was a performance artist. A few thought he might be someone important hiding from something. Nobody could have guessed the real truth. Nobody could have imagined that this quiet man in dirty clothes was conducting an experiment that would eventually expose uncomfortable truths about how society judges people based on appearance, status, and voice. His silence was speaking volumes, but nobody was listening yet. Not yet. Detective Rita Alvarez sat at her desk on a quiet Thursday evening, scrolling through case files on her computer. She was relatively new to the detective division, only 8 months in, and she had that hunger that comes with wanting to prove yourself. Most of the senior detectives had gone home for the day, but Rita stayed late looking for something, anything that might make her stand out. That's when she saw the file on the silent prisoner. It wasn't technically her case. It was just a vagrancy charge, nothing that required detective work. But something about it nagged at her. She clicked through the photos from his arrest, the mugshots, the fingerprint records that had come back with no matches. She zoomed in on his face. Beneath the beard and the dirt and the tangled hair, there was something there, something that didn't fit. She couldn't put her finger on it exactly, but her instincts were telling her to dig deeper. Rita pulled up the viral videos and news articles. She watched the courtroom footage someone had recorded on their phone. She read the psychiatrist's report that had been filed with the court. Everything pointed to a man who was perfectly sane, perfectly capable but deliberately choosing silence. Why would someone do that? She muttered to herself. She looked at his hands in the booking photos. They were dirty, yes, but she zoomed in closer. The fingers were long and straight. No signs of arthritis or injury. No calluses that would come from years of manual labor or living on the streets. These weren't the hands of someone who'd been homeless for long. Then she noticed his teeth in one photo where he was turned to the side. They were stained and yellowish, probably from not brushing, but they were straight. No gaps, no obvious decay. Someone had taken care of those teeth once, probably with expensive orthodontic work. Rita sat back in her chair. "Who are you?" she whispered to the photo on her screen. She started searching missing persons databases, but without a real name or better photos, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Still, she spent hours going through reports from the past year, looking at faces, reading descriptions. Nothing matched. The next day, Rita drove to the county jail on her lunch break. She'd pulled some strings to get a visitor slot with the silent man. She wanted to see him in person, to talk to him herself. They brought him into the visiting room in handcuffs. He sat down across from her, separated by a thick pane of glass. He looked at her with those same calm eyes she'd seen in all the photos. Rita picked up the phone on her side. He picked up his, "Hi," she said. "I'm Detective Alvarez. I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm just curious about your case." He nodded, acknowledging her words. "Everyone thinks you're crazy or playing some kind of game, but I don't think that's it." She leaned forward. "I've been looking at your photos, the reports, everything, and I keep noticing things that don't add up." His expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. "Interest, maybe, or respect. Your hands," she continued. "They're not the hands of someone who's been living rough for years. Your teeth are too good. And the way you sit, the way you hold yourself, there's something there. Education, maybe. Training of some kind." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "I think you're somebody," Rita said. "I think you had a life before this, maybe even an important one. And I think you walked away from it on purpose." The man set down his phone for a moment, then picked it back up. He gestured to the notepad he had with him. The guard brought it to the glass so Rita could see. He'd written, "Why does it matter?" "Because everyone's treating you like you're nobody," Rita said. "And I don't think that's true. I think there's a story here. A reason for all this." He wrote again. "Some experiments require sacrifice." Rita's eyebrows went up. "Experiment? What kind of experiment?" But he just shook his head and set down the phone. The visit was over. Rita left the jail more convinced than ever that she was onto something. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that word, experiment. What kind of experiment would require someone to give up their identity, to live on the streets, to get arrested and mocked and treated like garbage? She sat up in bed at 2 a.m. with a thought. What if it was a social experiment? What if he was studying something, experiencing something deliberately? The next week, Rita expanded her search. She started looking at missing persons reports from other countries, not just the United States. She searched for academics, researchers, anyone who might have an interest in social issues or homelessness. She struck out again and again. But she didn't give up. Meanwhile, the silent man's story continued to grow online. A popular true crime YouTube channel did a 20-minute deep dive on him, speculating about everything from witness protection to amnesia to elaborate hoaxes. The comment section was brutal. "He's just another attention seeker," one comment read. "Waste of taxpayer money keeping this guy locked up," said another. "He looks homeless because he is homeless. Stop making it more complicated than it is." A podcast called Strange Trials dedicated 2 episodes to him, interviewing legal experts and psychologists. None of them could figure it out. The silent man became a punchline on late-night comedy shows. In other news, a man who refuses to identify himself appeared in court today. When asked for comment, he had nothing to say, which is kind of his whole thing. People laughed. They shared memes. They moved on to the next viral story. But Rita kept digging. 3 weeks after she first saw the case, she was searching through an international database when she noticed something. A missing person report from 18 months ago, filed in another country. A man who'd told his family he was going on a personal journey and wouldn't be in contact for a while. The description was vague. Mid-50s, gray hair, athletic build. It could be anyone. But there was a name attached, and that name had a history. Rita started searching for that name specifically. What she found made her heart race. Articles about charity work, photos from fundraising events, a biography on a foundation website, and there, buried in the archives, a military photo from decades ago. She pulled it up on her screen and set it next to the mugshot of the silent prisoner. The faces were different, separated by years and circumstances. One was young, clean-shaven, in uniform with medals. The other was older, bearded, and dirty clothes, but the eyes were the same. That same calm, intelligent gaze. Rita leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. If this was the same person, then everything made sense and nothing made sense at the same time. This wasn't just some random guy off the streets. This was someone who'd had everything and had walked away from it all, but why? She looked at more articles, piecing together a story. Military service with distinction. Business success. Philanthropic work focusing on veterans and homelessness. A man who'd spent years trying to help people who'd fallen through society's cracks, and then he'd disappeared, telling his family he needed to experience life from a different perspective. Rita printed everything she could find. Photos, articles, biographical information. She organized it all into a folder, her hands shaking slightly. This was big. This was going to change everything, but she had to be sure. She had to confirm it was really him before she brought this to anyone. The next morning, Rita requested another visit with the prisoner. This time she brought a folder with her. When they sat down across from each other again, she didn't waste time. "I think I know who you are," she said quietly, holding up an old military photo so only he could see it through the glass. His face remained calm, but she saw it. A tiny flicker of acknowledgement she'd found him. The silent man looked at the photo Rita held up, then back at her face. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The visiting room felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in on a secret that was about to burst into the open. Finally, he picked up the phone. Rita grabbed hers. "It's you, isn't it?" Colonel David Morrison, retired. Founder of the Morrison Foundation for Veterans and Homeless Services. "You disappeared 18 months ago." He didn't nod or shake his head this time. He just looked at her with those steady eyes. "Your family filed a missing persons report," Rita continued, pulling out more papers. "But then they withdrew it a month later. Said you'd contacted them. Told them you were safe but needed time away. They thought you were on some kind of spiritual retreat." The man reached for his notepad. He wrote carefully, then held it up. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it's my job," Rita said. "And because everyone's been treating you like you're nothing. Like you're just some crazy homeless guy. But you're not, are you?" He wrote again. "In here, that's exactly what I am." "But why?" Rita leaned closer to the glass. "You had everything. Money, respect, a foundation doing good work. Why would you throw it all away to live on the streets and end up in jail?" The man set down his notepad and just looked at her. There was something in his expression now, something that hadn't been there before, a kind of sadness mixed with determination. He picked up the pen one more time. "To understand." Rita stared at those two words. To understand what? But he set down the phone and stood up. The visit was over. The guard came to take him back to his cell, and Rita was left sitting there with a folder full of information and more questions than answers. She went straight to her lieutenant's office. Lieutenant Hayes was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd worked her way up through the ranks the hard way. "I need to talk to you about the John Doe case," Rita said, closing the door behind her. "The silent guy? That's not even a real case, Alvarez. It's a misdemeanor. It's more than that." Rita spread her findings across the desk. "I think I've identified him. Colonel David Morrison, decorated veteran, successful businessman, philanthropist. He's been missing for 18 months. Hayes picked up the military photo and compared it to the mugshot. Her eyes widened. "Are you sure about this?" 90% sure. But he won't confirm it. He just keeps writing cryptic messages about understanding and experiments." "Experiments?" Hayes leaned back in her chair. "What kind of experiments?" "I think he's been living as a homeless person on purpose," Rita said. "His foundation focuses on veterans and homelessness. Maybe he wanted to experience it firsthand, to really understand what the people he's trying to help go through." Hayes was quiet for a moment, thinking, "If this is really him, we need to verify it. We need to contact his family, get dental records, something concrete. I was hoping you'd say that." The next day, Rita made a call to the Morrison Foundation's main office. She spoke with the director, a woman named Patricia who'd worked with the colonel for over a decade. Colonel Morrison left specific instructions, Patricia explained over the phone. He said if anyone came looking for him, we were to confirm he was safe but respect his privacy. He's on a personal journey. He's in jail, Rita said bluntly. There was silence on the other end. What? He was arrested for vagrancy 3 weeks ago. He won't identify himself. He won't speak. He's been sitting in county jail this whole time and people have been making fun of him on the internet. Oh my God. Patricia's voice cracked. We had no idea. He said he'd be unreachable, that he might end up in difficult situations, but we didn't think. I need to verify his identity officially, Rita said. Can you help me with that? Patricia agreed to send dental records and other identifying information. She also agreed to come to the city herself to see if she could talk to him. 2 days later, Rita stood outside the jail with Patricia, who looked like she hadn't slept since their phone call. She was in her 60s, dressed professionally, but her eyes were red from crying. He's doing this on purpose, you know, Patricia said as they walked toward the entrance. The colonel. He's always been someone who needs to fully understand something before he tries to fix it. When he started the foundation, he spent weeks talking to veterans, listening to their stories, but I guess that wasn't enough for him. Did he tell anyone he was going to do this? Rita asked. He told us he was going to disappear for a while, that he needed to experience life without his name, without his money, without anything that made him who he was. He said he wanted to see how society treats people who have nothing. Patricia wiped her eyes. I thought he meant he'd stay in budget hotels or something. I never imagined this. They went through security and were led to a private meeting room. This time the colonel was brought in without handcuffs, since it was an official visit. When he saw Patricia, something changed in his face. Just for a second, the mask slipped, and you could see the real person underneath. Patricia stood up, tears streaming down her face. Sir, what are you doing? He gestured to a chair, asking her to sit. Then he picked up a pen and notepad that had been left on the table. He wrote for several minutes while Patricia and Rita waited. Finally, he turned the notepad around so they could read it. I needed to know what it feels like to be invisible, to be someone society ignores. I've spent 10 years running a foundation for homeless veterans, but I realized I didn't truly understand their reality. So I removed everything that gave me privilege and power. No name, no money, no voice. I wanted to experience how the system treats people who have nothing and no one to advocate for them. Patricia read it twice, shaking her head. You could have died out there. You could have been hurt. He wrote again. Many people do die. Many people do get hurt. That's exactly the point. But now you're in here and people are mocking you, Rita said. Does that bother you? He wrote, it's the most important part. The mockery, the dismissal, the assumption that I'm crazy or stupid or worthless. That's what happens to people without a voice every single day. Now I know how it feels. Patricia was crying harder now. When will this end? When will you come back? The colonel looked at both of them for a long moment. Then he wrote, when I've learned everything I need to learn, when I can use this experience to actually change things. The dental records match, Rita said quietly. We know who you are now. We can release you. He shook his head firmly and wrote, not yet. I'm not done. You can't stay in jail by choice, Rita protested. That's not how this works. He wrote, then charge me with something else. Or let me go and I'll be back on the streets where I belong right now. Patricia looked at Rita helplessly. He's the most stubborn man I've ever met. Once he decides something, there's no changing his mind. Rita felt frustrated and impressed at the same time. This man had given up everything for what he believed in. He was willing to suffer, to be humiliated, to be treated as less than human, all to truly understand the people he wanted to help. Sir, Rita said, using his military title for the first time, people need to know about this. Your story could change how people think about homelessness, about how we treat people without power. He considered this, then wrote, not yet. The experiment isn't complete, but soon, when the time is right, I'll speak. I'll tell everyone what I've learned. But first, I need to see this through. Rita and Patricia left the jail together, both shaken by what they'd learned. They agreed to keep his identity confidential for now, respecting his wishes, but they also knew this couldn't stay secret forever. The truth was coming, and when it did, It would force everyone who'd laughed at the silent prisoner to look in the mirror and ask themselves some uncomfortable questions about dignity, judgment, and what really makes a person valuable in society's eyes. 3 more weeks passed. Colonel Morrison remained in jail, still silent, still refusing to use his real name. Rita checked on him regularly, and each time she asked if he was ready to reveal himself. Each time he shook his head, but something was changing. Rita could see it in his eyes. Whatever he'd been searching for, whatever he'd needed to understand, he was getting close to finding it. Then one morning, everything shifted. Rita got a call from Lieutenant Hayes. "You need to get down to the courthouse, now. Your silent colonel just asked to address the court." Rita's heart jumped. She grabbed her jacket and drove faster than she probably should have. By the time she got to the courthouse, word had already spread. The gallery was packed with reporters, curious citizens, and people who'd been following the story online. Camera crews waited outside since cameras weren't allowed in the courtroom. Judge Harrison looked both irritated and intrigued as they brought the colonel in. Ms. Chen, his public defender, looked completely confused. Nobody had told her what was happening. "Your Honor," the bailiff said, "the defendant has indicated he wishes to speak." A wave of murmurs rolled through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel. "Order, everyone be quiet." He looked at the colonel. "Sir, you've been silent for nearly 2 months. Are you now willing to identify yourself?" The colonel stood. For the first time since his arrest, he spoke. His voice was clear, steady, and educated. The voice of someone used to commanding rooms. "Your Honor, my name is David Morrison. I am a retired colonel from the United States Army, and I am the founder of the Morrison Foundation for Veterans and Homeless Services." The courtroom erupted. People gasped, talked over each other, pulled out phones. Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order, I will clear this courtroom." It took a full minute for everyone to settle down. The judge looked at the colonel with an expression that was hard to read. Shock, definitely, but also something else. "Maybe respect, Colonel Morrison," the judge said slowly. "Would you care to explain why you've put this court, not to mention yourself, through this ordeal?" "I would, Your Honor. With your permission, I'd like to make a statement." Judge Harrison gestured for him to continue. The entire courtroom held its breath. 18 months ago, I made a decision," the colonel began. "I had spent 10 years running a foundation dedicated to helping homeless veterans and others who'd fallen on hard times. I had raised millions of dollars. I had opened shelters and funded programs. But I realized something that troubled me deeply. I didn't truly understand the people I was trying to help." He paused, looking around the courtroom. "I knew statistics. I knew facts and figures. But I didn't know what it felt like to be invisible, to be someone society looks past or worse, looks down on. So I decided to experience it myself. I gave away my identification, my wallet, my phone. I dressed in old clothes and lived on the streets. I wanted to see how people would treat me when I had no power, no status, no voice. And what I learned broke my heart." The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling notes, just listening. "I learned that when you have nothing, people assume you are nothing. I was ignored, avoided, insulted. People crossed the street to get away from me. Store owners chased me off their property. I was treated as if I was less than human, and that was before I was arrested." He turned to look at the gallery. "Once I entered this system, it got worse. I was mocked. Guards made jokes. Other inmates bullied me. I became a viral sensation on social media, but only as a punchline. People made memes about me. They laughed at the crazy homeless man who wouldn't talk. But here's what none of you knew. Every insult, every joke, every dismissive look taught me something vital. It showed me exactly what millions of people in this country experience every single day, not because they choose to, but because circumstances push them there. Because they're veterans with PTSD, or people with mental illness, or individuals who lost everything through no fault of their own." The colonel's voice grew stronger. My silence was deliberate. It was part of the experiment. I wanted to know how the system treats people who can't advocate for themselves, people who don't have lawyers or family members or resources. And the answer is terribly. We treat them terribly. Judge Harrison was leaning forward now, completely focused. "In the 2 months I've been here, not one person tried to really help me, except for one. Detective Alvarez, who's sitting in this courtroom right now, was the only person who looked at me and saw a human being worth investigating, worth understanding. Everyone else saw what they expected to see, a homeless nobody who didn't matter. Rita felt tears stinging her eyes. So yes, Your Honor, I'm guilty of vagrancy. I'm guilty of refusing to provide identification. But I'm not sorry. This experience has taught me more than a decade of research ever could. It's shown me exactly what needs to change in how we treat our most vulnerable citizens. The colonel took a breath. I'm ready now to pay whatever fine this court deems appropriate, and then I'm going back to my foundation. But I won't be the same person I was before. I can't be. Because now I know. I truly know. Judge Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unusual. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Colonel Morrison, he said finally, in 30 years on the bench, I've never seen anything quite like this. I don't know whether to admire your commitment or question your methods. I question my methods too, Your Honor, the colonel said honestly, but I don't regret them. The judge looked down at his papers, then back up. The charges against you are minor. Time served and a small fine will satisfy the court's requirements. But before I release you, I want to say something. Everyone waited. You've held up a mirror to this courtroom, to this system, to all of us, and what we see reflected isn't pretty. I hope we're wise enough to learn from it. He banged his gavel. Case dismissed. You're free to go, Colonel. The courtroom exploded with noise. Reporters rushed for the doors to file their stories. Camera crews outside went live. Within minutes, the news was spreading across every platform. Silent prisoner revealed as decorated colonel in social experiment. Philanthropist lived as homeless to understand system failures. Colonel's 2-month silence speaks volumes about how we treat the poor. Outside the courthouse, the colonel stood on the steps in his shabby clothes, now surrounded by microphones and cameras. Patricia was there crying and laughing at the same time. Rita stood nearby, still processing everything. Colonel Morrison, why did you choose silence? One reporter shouted. Because millions of people in this country have no voice, he answered. I wanted to understand what that feels like. Now I do, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life amplifying their voices instead of my own. What will you do now? Another asked. I'm going to completely restructure my foundation based on what I've learned. We're going to train police officers, court officials, and social workers using my experience. We're going to change how the system treats people without power or privilege, and we're going to do it with input from the people who've actually lived this reality, not just people like me who think they understand it. Do you have a message for the people who mocked you online? The colonel smiled slightly. I don't blame anyone for their reactions. I looked like exactly what people expected, and they responded accordingly. That's human nature, but I hope this experience makes people pause before they judge. Behind every homeless person, every silent face in a courtroom, every person society dismisses, there's a story. There's a human being who deserves dignity and respect. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. I want to thank Detective Rita Alvarez, who was the only person who looked beyond appearances and saw that something didn't add up. She restored my faith that there are still people in the system who care about truth and justice. We need more people like her. Rita felt her face flush as cameras turned toward her. The press conference ended and the colonel was finally able to leave. He turned down offers for rides and hotel rooms. I'm going to walk, he said. I've got a lot to think about. As he disappeared into the city, still in his worn clothes, people recognized him now. Some stopped him to shake his hand. Others apologized for jokes they'd made. A few homeless people he'd met during his time on the streets came up to him with tears in their eyes. You did it, man, one of them said. You made them see us. The colonel's story dominated news cycles for weeks. His foundation received a flood of donations. But more importantly, it sparked conversations across the country about homelessness, dignity, and how society treats its most vulnerable members. Police departments began training programs based on his experience. Courts started implementing new policies. Social services were restructured. It didn't fix everything. One person's experiment couldn't solve systemic problems overnight. But it was a start. It was a crack in the wall, letting light into dark places. And somewhere in the city, the colonel was back at work, no longer silent, using his voice to amplify the voices of those who'd been silenced for far too long. His 2 months of silence had spoken louder than a lifetime of words ever could.